So again, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on an introduction to ITIL 4. I hope you are staying safe and healthy at home. In this short webinar, we should be able to understand IT service management and be able to navigate and apply the concepts of ITIL 4 on a foundation level. So normally, the ITIL workshop that's being done with companies usually takes 1 to 2 days. But in this short 2-hour session today, we will try to introduce all the concepts that's included in the ITIL 4 Foundation exam, which includes the following topics: service management, including its 4 dimensions, the service value system, guiding principles, service value chain, continual improvement, and the 34 ITIL practices. So we may not be able to discuss all of them in depth, but we will be making sure to introduce each of the topics that's a part of the foundation level of the exam. Just to give you an idea, the exam format for ITIL is a 40-question multiple choice exam. You are given an hour to complete it, and the passing score is 65%. Right here, you can see the certification path. So ITIL 4 is quite new. It was just started last year, I believe around February 2019, and the foundation exam was just released last year. The remaining exams are not yet all available, although some of them were started to be rolled out late last year to early this year. So it's really a good time to catch up with the ITIL 4 certification path because it's new and it's the way moving forward. If you guys are familiar, there is an older version of ITIL, which is the version 3. So as we start our discussion on service management, I'd like to introduce the topic with a brief history on the Industrial Revolution. So if you guys are familiar, we had the first industrial revolution between the 18th to 19th century, where we had mechanization. So this is brought about by the invention of the steam-powered engine, where humanity transitioned from an agri-based society of farmers into a more industrialized society. And during this period, we had automated a lot of our normal manual tasks. So life was better then, but of course, as we know, we as humans want to progress more. So during the 19th century, we had what we call the Second Industrial Revolution, where mass production and electricity became prominent. So this was brought about by the invention of electricity that allowed us to work more efficiently, and the introduction of other industries like oil, steel, and etc. During this time, the telephone was also invented to allow us to communicate better, and also the invention of the light bulb that allowed us to replace the candle light so that we can work through the night. Likewise, we also invented here the combustion engine that allowed us to travel and transport into long distances. So life was again more better than before, but of course we did not stop there. During the around 1980s, we had what we call the Third Industrial Revolution, wherein we had electronic and IT systems and automation. So during this time, we also call it as the Digital Revolution, where we had more electronic gadgets like personal computers, we had mobile phones, mobile devices. So this had changed again how we live. And it was during this time where ITIL was first introduced. It was developed in the 1980s, which originally stands for Information Technology Infrastructure Library. This was a series of best practices and guidance on how to run an IT organization. It also creates processes and procedures to better run IT systems for companies. So now, happening right now, we are again on another breakthrough. We are now, it's actually happening right now, the fourth industrial revolution, wherein the fusion between the physical and digital systems are starting to blur out. So now we have things like cloud computing, we have robotics, nanotechnology, we have Internet of Things. So the line between the physical and the digital realms are starting to be fused together. So we have here, example is the smartphones, but everything becomes smart. We have smart TVs, smart lights, smart bulbs, so everything is becoming smarter. So maybe you are wondering, why are we discussing the Industrial Revolution at all? Well, it's just to make a point that ITIL 4 simply stands for ITIL for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So it no longer stands for the Information Technology Library, Infrastructure Library. So ITIL is no longer an acronym. So we treat ITIL as a brand. So it's like a coined term for a series of best practices and framework that applies for service management. So it no longer just applies to specifically to IT organizations, but to any industries as well that has service. So I hope this is clear. So because before, during the version 3 and prior versions, it normally is an acronym for the Information Technology Infrastructure Library. So now we just call it ITIL 4. It's not even called a version 4, but simply ITIL 4. So the governing body here is Axelos. This is where you register and take your exam. So now that we have that brief introduction, let's talk about the need for service management. So the first one is that technology is advancing faster today than ever before. So this is very evident since we mentioned we are transitioning again into the fourth industrial revolution. Likewise, every organization is a service organization. Now, you may think that you are in the process of selling or having a retail. Like, for example, if you're working on a grocery store, you may think your organization is focused on retail or selling. But if you really take a closer look on it, everything that you do, in order for you to be able to sell, there are a lot of services involved. So in the back end, you may have a logistics system or a logistic service to transport your goods from one place to another. You may have inventory systems, and you even may have an online ordering system and internal tools for your employees. So that's why we call every organization as a service organization. Lastly, almost all services today are IT enabled. So this is very self-explanatory naman na I think almost everything, almost all services today are IT enabled. It's hard to think or go back to a way when we do manual record bookings and everything. So now everything is stored on a database and such. So that is why we need to have a framework for service management because everything is digital now. With this, we define our first definition for today. So we define service management according to the ITIL 4 definition. Service management is a set of specialized organizational capabilities for enabling value to customers in the form of services. So here we have our two keywords, which is value and services. Value naman, we define value is as the perceived benefits, usefulness, and importance of something. It is important to take note that the recipient determines the perceived value. However, value is co-created through an active collaboration. So if you guys are familiar with the previous version of ITIL in version 3, it kept on implying that the recipient is the one who determines the value. Well, that is still true, di ba? When we often hear the saying that the customer is always right. However, in ITIL 4, we now acknowledge that value must be co-created through an active collaboration. So hindi pwede na yung recipient lang ang magdedetermine. The recipient also has to do their part in order to achieve value. Now we can proceed with our organizations and people. So in service management, we have an entity we call as an organization, which is a person or a group of people that has its own function and responsibilities. We can classify an organization into two, which is the service providers, wherein the organization who delivers the services, and service consumers to whom services are delivered. Now, under service consumers, we have three roles. We have the customer, the user, and the sponsor. Now, you may think that this may be three different key persons, but in fact, one person can hold more than one role. So as a service consumer, the customer is the one who defines the requirement for services. So the customer doesn't necessarily be the one to pay for the service. So examples of this is your CTO in your company or maybe a project manager. They are just the ones who define the services. And they are also responsibility for the outcomes of the service consumption. The user, on the other hand, is a person who uses the service. So this is actually the actual end user of the service. And lastly, we have the sponsor, who is a person who authorizes the budget for service consumption. So it can be the chairman of the company or the CEO or someone who has the power to authorize the budget for the service consumption. Okay, moving forward. Now, we can define what service is. So this one is a very important definition, and you need to really memorize this word per word. So service is a means of enabling value co-creation by facilitating outcomes that customers want to achieve, without the customer having to manage specific costs and risks. So we break down this definition into three parts. The first one is that service is a means of enabling value co-creation. Again, this is in reference to the definition of value, wherein service is the means of enabling it. The next part of this is that facilitating outcomes that customers want to achieve. In this second part of the definition, we emphasize that as a service provider, we are only here to facilitate the outcomes. It is still the customers who will achieve the outcomes that they desire. And lastly, without the customer having to manage specific costs and risks. Here, of course, when you procure a service, you do so in order to minimize the cost and risk that you are having. So later on in a later slide, we'll be having a more in-depth discussion on cost and risks. Products, on the other hand, is a configuration of resources created by the organization that will be potentially valuable for their customers. So if you have a resources, if you configure it accordingly, that is what we call product. So you may take note that here in ITIL, there's a lot of definitions. So this is really a worthy topic, and you just really need to bear with the definitions according to how ITIL 4 defines it. And in the exam, if you happen to choose to pursue a certification path with ITIL, most of it are definitions and scenario-based questions. So moving forward, we have service offerings. Service offerings are actually just a collection of services designed to address the needs of a target consumer group. We have goods wherein the ownership is transferred to the consumer, and then the consumer takes responsibility for the future use. So examples of this is software licenses, diba? If you have, for example, Microsoft Windows that you have bought a license from Microsoft, you own already that license and you have that perpetually. The next one is access to resources wherein the ownership is not transferred to the consumer. So example of this are your subscription-based subscription-based model like Microsoft Office 365, wherein you subscribe for as much as you want, and once you terminate your subscription, you won't be able to access that resource anymore. So The third one is service actions. This one is more on the ones that is being performed by the provider to address a consumer need. Examples of this is your support. Example, again in a Microsoft environment, you have a Premier support. So this is an example of a service action. Another example is your courier service or your logistics service. Once they deliver the goods, then the action is complete. Normally, there is an agreement with this with the consumer. So of course, when you have service, you enter into a relationship. The service provider and the service consumer goes into a service relationship. So we need to manage the relationship between this to enable continuously value co-creation. Because sabi nga natin, we have to co-create value. Here we have a few activities involved. We have what we call service provisioning. So this consists of activities performed by a service provider to provide services. So example, you are procuring a telco. In order for you to be able to avail of their service, you have what we call provisioning. So you submit your requirements, you fill out forms. So all these processes, all this activity, we classify them as service provisioning. Service consumption are the activities that's where the actual consumption of the services happen. So this is the actual way on how you will be able to send SMS, how you will be able to avail of the promos, and other self-help benefits once you are already on board the service. So I hope this one is clear so far. So here we next have the service relationship model. So here we just show that in a service relationship, an organization can have the role of a service consumer and a service provider. So let's have an example. For example, we have Microsoft here. Microsoft, for example, acts as a service provider to AWS, because if you are familiar with AWS, we have EC2 compute engines, and there's a template there that allows you to create Windows-based machines. So they get their license from Microsoft, so they are a service consumer of Microsoft. However, on the other hand, StarHub, for example, is a service consumer of AWS, because StarHub, let's say, is running their cloud infrastructure on AWS. So we can see here that AWS can be a service provider as well as a service consumer. And if we have ICPEP, for example, we use StarHub for our internet facilities in our offices. We act as a service consumer of StarHub, and StarHub acts as a service provider. However, if ICPEP provides training services to employees of Microsoft, then we also act as a service provider to Microsoft. So this just shows that any organization can assume both roles depending on the perspective. Now we discuss the outcomes, cost, and risk. So remember earlier we had cost and risk in our definition of service. So here, in order for us to deliver value to our customers, it's more of a balancing act on how you would have the cost and risk. So the more cost you induce, you probably have lesser risk kasi you avail of services in order for you to reduce risks. So it's more of a balancing act when deciding to procure a service or not, is to consider the cost and risk associated with it. So a few more definitions here. We have outcome. Outcome is just a result for a stakeholder enabled by one or more outputs. Output is a tangible or intangible deliverable of an activity. So just remember that one or more outputs produce an outcome. Next, we have costs. Cost simply refers to the amount of money spent on a specific activity, and the risks refer to possible events that could harm or lose the objectives. So any event na can cause harm or loss. Potentially can cause harm or loss. So I hope this one is also clear. We are just briefly discussing them. Last, for our first part in the definition of service management is utility and warranty. Utility is the functionality offered by a product or service to meet a particular need. So the keyword here is fit for purpose. Warranty is the assurance that a product or service will meet agreed requirements or fit for use. So for example, if you procure internet from an ISP, the ability of the internet service provider to give you an internet is what we call utility. However, for them to maintain the service level agreement, for example, they promised 50 Mbps with 80% reliability, the assurance that they can give that is what we call warranty or fit for use. So this too is often lumalabas yan sa exam, and you just need to absorb the definition of these. So before we proceed to the next portion, we just have a few fill-in-the-blank questions here. So this one, blank, is a means of enabling co-creation by facilitating outcomes that customers want to achieve without the customer having to manage specific costs and risks. So the answer here is service, which describes outcomes. The correct answer here is B, results for a stakeholder. So that wraps the first part of this introduction. So do you have any questions before we proceed to the 4 dimensions of service management? So just feel free to put it in the chat box. If there's none, then we will proceed. Okay, so the next part of our topic for today is the 4 dimensions on service management. So in service management, we have what we call organizations and people, information and technology, partners and suppliers, value streams, and processes. In the center of it is what our goal is, which is to have value, and around it are the external factors. So let's dive into it one by one. First one is service. The first one is organizations and people. So when we consider this is where we consider the formal organizational structure of your organization. So do you want your organization to have a more vertical hierarchy, or do you want your organization to have a more horizontal one? So this is where you consider it. The next one is required staffing and competencies. You have to know what kind of people you need. Do you need Windows administrators? Do you need Linux administrators? So this is where you decide it. Also, you have to have your roles and responsibilities. So what kind of teams do you need to have? Do you need a team leader? Do you need a team manager? Or do you need just one? So this is where you consider all of those roles and responsibilities. And lastly, we have culture. In culture, you decide what kind of culture your organization will be. Will it be a formal one, or will it be a more casual one? So I myself, I've been to both kind of culture company. When I joined Google before, it was a very casual company. So everything was light. You can play video games in the office. Once you are not busy at work, you can wear shorts in the office. And then I transferred into a local bank in the Philippines, and everything was very formal. Every time was the time you do is very accounted for. You can't even have a longer lunch than what's allocated for, and you need to wear long sleeve and necktie in the office. So this is where you decide on the culture, because culture is something that's very difficult to change once the organization culture has been set, it will be there for traditions to come. So the next dimension is our information and technology. So here we have information and knowledge, technologies, and relationships between components. So for information, for most services, information management is the primary means of enabling customer value. So we need to make sure that information is always available, reliable, accessible, timely, accurate, and relevant. In terms of technologies, we have two types of technologies. We have technologies that support service management and technologies supporting IT services. So here are some examples for supporting service management. We have workflow systems, internal communication systems, inventory systems, etc. In terms of supporting the IT services, this is the actual service that you provide. So this is where your IT architecture comes in, your databases. There can also be communication systems for external facing clients, cloud computing, and the rest. Also, in this dimension, we have a few information technology considerations. So we ask these questions for ourselves in order when we consider technologies that we want to acquire. So the first one, for example, we will not be reading all of this, but maybe we select a few. So the first one is it compatible with the current architecture? So example, you are buying a technology that you wish to use in your company. You have to assess if it's compatible with your current architecture. If you're buying a software, let's say a Trend Micro antivirus software for your servers, you need to check if it's compatible in your current architecture. Maybe you're running Linux-based servers and it's not really something that you can apply to those. Another one is, does it raise any regulatory compliance or information security control issues? So back in the Philippines, when I joined a local bank, everything is regulated. We have the BSP. So banks in the Philippines are normally scared to adopt the latest technology because they don't want to go into the compliance process because it's really a painstaking process to do. So this is also something that you need to consider. So here are the other information technology considerations that you can ask yourself when considering acquiring technology for your organization. The third one is partners and suppliers. Now, every organization relies on partners and suppliers. For example, here in ICPEP, we have a couple of partners as well because we have a common goal and common risks. So partners shares common goals and risk with you. And you collaborate with your partners to achieve your desired outcomes. Suppliers, on the other hand, are the ones who provide goods and services to you. And normally, suppliers engage into formal contracts and clear separation of roles. So, of course, in an organization, you need to manage your partners and suppliers in order for you to properly create a strategy for you to deliver the service. Service integration management involves the use of specially established integrator to ensure that service relationships are properly coordinated. So of course, when you have a trusted partner, you need to have coordination in order to know the correct roles of each other in the service. The last one is our value streams and processes. Here, we define the activities that will bring value to your process. And important here is for you to always eliminate the non-value adding activities. So for example, you have an activity that has a lot of manual processes. You should go for automation because sayang yung time dun sa mga manual processes. So there is actually different frameworks if you are interested in improving your value streams and processes. An example of this is the Lean Six Sigma, if you heard of it, wherein it focuses on how to improve your internal processes in order to speed up or eliminate the waste activities in your processes. Later on, we'll talk more about this when we discuss the service value chain. So again, here are 4 dimensions, and we have here our external factors. So these are the external factors influencing the dimensions. We have here the PESEL method, the PESEL model, wherein these factors are something that you really can't control, but still you need to factor them in when making a decision. So we have political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. So example for today, we're in a pandemic, so we are probably affected by economic or environmental factors because I mean, a lot of jobs are at stake now and a lot of services are no longer needed. So you need to have a plan on how to respond to these factors. Likewise, if you are familiar, in the Philippines, we have the ABS-CBN. It's probably more of a political or a legal factor that allowed them to, to be denied renewal of their franchise. So they need to have a plan on how to deal with it. So just consider these factors when making the decision that it could have an impact in the future. So we have completed our 4 dimensions and we are now ready to proceed with the service value system. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. So I'll be proceeding with the service value system. The service value system describes how all the components and activities of the organization work together as a system to enable value creation. So here we have this diagram. If you are, so here we notice that we have here our inputs and the output is value. So we have opportunities and demand as our input. We process it in our service value system, which is in the middle of it is our service value chain. We'll be taking a closer look on this later. And then the output of it is just value. So again, here are the components of the service value system. We have the guiding principles, governance, the practices, and continual improvement. So whenever we have an opportunity, we process them inside this system in order for us to produce the appropriate value. So first, let's talk about the guiding principles. In ITIL 4, we have 7. So we have focus on value, start where you are, progress iteratively with feedback, collaborate and promote visibility, think and work holistically, keep it simple and practical, and optimize and automate. The first one, focus on value. Of course, when you have something in mind, you always want to have value in mind. As an example, we all know in these times right now we have COVID-19 and it's a challenge to do contact tracing. So when you have a project, for example, you want to make sure that it will bring value. So it will bring value by terms of allowing the contact tracing to be more efficient and more reliable. So here in Singapore, we have the Singapore government developed an app in order to speed up the contact tracing. And likewise, I believe ICPEP Singapore is also developing similar that we hope to contribute in the Philippines. So in focusing on value, the first one that you need to look at is your target users. So you need to put yourself in their shoes to determine what kind of value do they need. So next is start where you are. So here, it's important that you do not start from scratch and build something new without considering what is already available to use. So in our scenario of the contact tracing app, for example, here in ICPEP, we decided to develop it as a mobile app because we know that everyone has a smartphone now. Instead of developing our own hardware from scratch, we just develop an app, for example, because yun nga, we can just utilize existing available resources. The next is progress iteratively with feedback. Here, it's important that you do not attempt to do everything at once. So here you put your processes or your releases into iterations and put feedback into it during and after each iteration to ensure that the activities are appropriate and still focus on providing value. Kasi if you do it in one big and then you find something wrong, parang uulitin mo na naman siya lahat. When you just chop it into small iterations, you can correct what's wrong and proceed with a better output as you go on. So for example, you release this contact tracing app. Like here in Singapore, the Trace Together app during the first release, it only really is a pure contact tracing application in your phone. But later on, they added more features such as the QR barcode scanning that allows you to enter an establishment and your identity is also logged there. So that is something that you consider when following the ITIL guiding principles. The next one is to collaborate and promote visibility. So if you build teams that has overlapping responsibilities, you need to make sure that you collaborate with each of them and promote transparency with the sharing of all the information in the greatest degree possible. You should avoid hidden agendas kasi nga we need to promote visibility. So for example, in an IT company, you have application developers and infrastructure managers. So sometimes I know that there's a line between the two, but in order for you to really give the service properly, these two teams need to collaborate and have transparency in their processes. The next one is think and work holistically. Here, we assume that no service or element used to provide the service stands alone. So if you as a company have a service that provides your customers, you need to act as one company. So you don't want to have to put your customers into different teams directly. You want them to have a solid lookout or outlook with your organization or company. So the next thing is keep it simple and practical. If a process, service, action, or metric fails to provide value or produce useful outcome, you should eliminate it. So if you review your processes, your plan for the project, you need to just keep it simple and practical. If you find something redundant, something that's wasteful of your time, eliminate it as soon as possible. And the last one is optimize and automate. Here, resources of all types should be used to their best effect. Eliminate anything that is truly wasteful and leverage technology to the greatest capability. So here, very straightforward naman, if you have an opportunity to automate, always automate. This is really said not only in the ITIL processes, but I think any service management framework is to really optimize and automate. So if you feel you are doing something manually that requires a lot of time, diba, waste of time when you can do something more productive, try to find a way to automate it. There's a lot of scripts and tools that you can use to automate a lot of processes. For example, yung dun sa ating contact tracing, diba, it automates the need for you to, for example, manually call each and every contact. If the app is installed to every person, you can just send a push notification to them. Then it automatically advises them that you have been in contact with one of the COVID-19 positive patients. So it's very efficient kasi nga they tried to automate the process of it. So I hope the guiding principles is clear. We have here's a sample questions from the exam. This is more of a situational based. So let me just read this for you. You have been asked to investigate an email service within your organization that is failing to meet its intended outcomes. You begin by determining the intended outcome and then observe the current service with as much objectivity as possible. Based on your observations, you are able to determine the current service is not meeting its utility and warranty requirements. Which guiding principles best describes your actions in this scenario? So the correct answer here is start where you are. So this is so because here in the second sentence, it is mentioned here that you begin by determining the intended outcome and then observe the current service with as much objectivity as possible. The fact that you tried to observe first the current service with as much objectivity as possible, that is starting where you are. So another question, which guiding principle is concerned with an understanding of how all the parts of an organization work together in an integrated way? So the answer here is think and work holistically. So this is just based on the definition. Now that we have the guiding principles, we can now proceed with the service value chain. So before we proceed, do you guys have any questions? Okay, if there's none, I'll go ahead and proceed. Okay, the service value chain is an operating model which outlines the key objectives, the key activities required to respond to demand and facilitate value creation through the creation of management and of products and services. Okay, so this is our service value chain. So remember that we had this service value system, and in the middle of it is the service value chain. So this is now what the service value chain looks like. So if you can recall, if you are familiar with the version 3 of ITIL, it was a linear method. It's more of a linear method wherein you start with service strategy, service design, service transition, service operation, continual service improvement, and then back into the service strategy. Now in ITIL 4, we don't follow a linear approach here. So normally it starts with the engage, but it doesn't really need to have to. So how did it transition to this? So as you can see here, we have the improve phase, which overlaps almost everything except the plan phase. And it just means that in every phase of your service, you have feedback loops that allow you to improve in every opportunity. And then it's really a chain of events. So you design on how you configure your service based on your company's needs. So for example, Engage can feed outputs into any of this central cube, obtain and build, design and transition. And likewise, the inputs from this and outputs can be fed into any of these phases. So we'll just be having a few description of each. Under the plan, the first phase, which is plan, we ensure a shared understanding of the vision, current status, and improvement direction for all four dimensions and all products and services across the organization. So this is more on the executive level where they all do the planning for what happens next, diba? And normally the inputs in the plan can also be the outputs from your improve phase. For example, it can be outputs from your engage because you have customers engaging you to do this and you listen them, diba? Normally in companies you have what we call enhancement request for a product wherein clients can write in, I wish the iPhone has this feature. So the outputs from the engage activities can be fed into the plan phase. So we already probably know improve, which is just ensuring continual improvement of products, services, and practices across all value chain activities and the 4 dimensions of service management. So here, improve, it can be in the form of feedback from your clients, complaints, suggestions, surveys. So this is where all those activities fit into. The next one is engage. This is more of your parang frontliners. This is the one who talk to your external customers. So it provides a good understanding of stakeholder needs, continual engagement with stakeholders, transparency, and good relationship with all stakeholders. The next is obtain and build. So this is where you obtain the components for the services that you are planning to do. And you also build it in this phase. So pinagsama na siya dito, obtain and build. But here we also have design and transition. So this is where you design it before you build it. So kasi sabi nga natin, it's not really a linear approach or a linear sequence of events. So for example, you have designed something, the output of your design, you feed it into the obtain build phase so that the team who is assigned can buy the components and build it. And then once you're ready to transition it back, the output of it can go back to the design and transition phase so that they can start transitioning it to the live environment. The next thing is deliver and support. So once you are ready with your design and your product is already built, you transition into the deliver and after support. Kasi once you have the service, you are already providing the service, a lot of customers may need support. So you need to ensure that the service components are available when they are needed and meet agreed specifications. So example, this one, let's say you are working on stocks, for example, you introduce a new line of workstations for your company. So sometimes users will call your help desk, service desk that something is not working. So you need to make sure that you feed those outputs to obtain and build para ma-obtain nila or mabili nila yung mga components na kailangan and make sure that there is something on stock. And then you can deliver those components to your workstations. Likewise to other services, ganun din yung mangyayari. So normally under the service value chain, we really identify all the potential inputs and outputs for each of the phases. But since we don't have much time, probably in the slides that I will share to all of you, you can read through the inputs and outputs for each so that you can have a better grasp of how each of the phases matters. Or probably in your current organization, you can start observing where in these phases you belong. So if you remember earlier, we talked about value streams. So here, we just specify that each of the steps, for example, of an engage activity can be an output to a deliver and support activity. And the next output of this can go into the engage. So this one, you normally do it based on how your company needs it to be. Kasi normally when we have ITIL workshop, it's really more on the identification of what your service portfolio is in your company, what are your current processes, and we normally help you improve on it. So since this is just more of an introduction, we just define what examples we can see. Now, for example, nga here we have engage activity. One of the steps under the engage activity feeds into the delivery and support activity, which also feeds to engage. Yung isa namang activity here, step B1 and step B2, the output of it goes into deliver and support again. But after it, it goes into the obtain and build phases. So now we have just a simple question. Which ITIL concept describes the service value chain? The answer here is the service value system. So why is it the service value system? Kasi the service value chain is under this diagram, which is the service value system. So this is quite one kind of a trick question in the exam, but if you come to really absorb it, but it's the service value system. Next, we have continual improvement. Continual improvement is used to align the organization's practices and services with changing business needs through the ongoing identification and improvement of services, service components, practices, or any element involved in the efficient and effective management of products and services. So here in continual improvement, we have this diagram. So we need to ask ourselves, what is the vision? So here we define our business vision, mission, goals, and objectives. So once we have our set vision, we ask ourselves, where are we are now? So this is where you perform baseline assessments. So you need to know where you stand. So is your service bad? Are you getting a lot of negative survey feedbacks? So here you need to determine where you are. So once you determine that I am bad in my customer satisfaction, we proceed into where do we want to be. So here we start to define measurable targets. So this is really important to have measurable targets kasi you need to know where you stand. So if you, in terms of the Six Sigma principles, it is always said that if you can't measure it, you can't control it. So metrics are really important. So once you have defined your measurable targets, you need to know how do we get there. So how are you going to where you want to be? So this is where you start defining your improvement plan. So for example, I will train my service desk agents to be more technically capable so that they can respond quickly. So these are examples of your improvement plan. Once you have the plan, you execute the actions, and then after you have execute, you review. So did we get there? So you are always be able to review it because of your set deliverables. So you evaluate your metrics and KPIs. KPIs is your key performance index. So once you are confident and concluded you have reached what you want to be, you need to keep the momentum going. So in order to do that, you go back into the vision again and start it from the vision phase into the other processes within the continual improvement. So I hope this one's clear. This is very important since, you know, as you encounter naman all organizations, diba? When you call technical support, they are always eager for your feedback kasi they are practicing continual improvement and they want to keep the momentum going. Hindi porket na meet na yung metrics, you stop there. They want to continuously achieve it. They don't want to lose the momentum of providing good service. So here we have another scenario question. Bridget is leading an improvement initiative within your company. She has been told that the company wants to have the highest customer satisfaction in the industry. Currently, the company has a customer satisfaction rating of 92%, but the industry leader has an average of 94%. Bridget decides that the company should set their goal of obtaining a 96% customer satisfaction score within the next 12 months. what step of the continual improvement model is Bridget currently in? So the answer is, where do we want to be? So as you can see, so Bridget set a goal because he want to obtain 96%. Gusto niyang talunin yung industry leader that has 94%. So that is a clear example of where do you want to be. Next, Betsy has been hired by your company to lead the process improvement efforts. You have shared with her the overall vision for the process improvement, and she begins to analyze your current resources, processes, and metrics. What step of the continual improvement model is Betsy performing? So here is the answer is where are we are now. So kasi Betsy analyze your current resources, processes, and metrics. So nagpa-perform siya ng baseline assessment. So now we move into the ITIL practices. So what is a practice? A practice is a set of organizational resources designed for performing work and accomplishing an objective. Supports multiple service value chain activities and includes resources based on the 4 dimensions of service management. So our ITIL practices are divided into 3 categories. We have general management practices, service management practices, and technical management practices. So under general management, we have these. But for the foundation exam, yung may dalawang asterisk here are the ones that you need to know in depth, and the one with 1 asterisk are the one that you just need to know on a definition level. So we have continual improvement. We already discussed this earlier, which is just to align the organization's practice and services with changing business needs through ongoing identification of improvement of services. Information security management. This is to protect the information needed by the organization to conduct its business. And relationship management, to establish and nurture links between the organization and its stakeholders at strategic and tactical levels. Last, we have supplier management, which is to ensure the organization's supplier and their performance are managed appropriately to support the provision of seamless quality products, services, and components. So now we proceed with the service management practice. So if you have been working in the IT industry within a year or so, you probably are very familiar with the service management practices. Kasi I believe most organizations that has an IT department adopt this, and it's normally based on the ITIL framework. So again, here we have some, not all are really is really something that you need to know in depth for the foundation level exam, but in the succeeding ITIL certification exams, they will be individually discussed in detail. So for the sake of the foundation exam, we have change control, incident management, problem management, and service desk, service level management, and service request management. These are the ones that you need to know in depth. IT asset management, monitoring and event management, release management, service configuration management, and service continuity management. These are something that you just need to know the definition of. So first, we talk about change control. So change control, the purpose of it is to maximize the number of successful IT changes by ensuring that risks have been properly assessed, authorizing changes to proceed, and managing the change schedule. So I'm sure if you've been working in the IT industry, lagi kayo nagre-raise ng mga change requests because that is really part of the ITIL framework. So we categorize changes into 3. We have standard changes, normal, and emergency. Standard changes are pre-authorized. So hindi na niya kailangan ipa-approve kasi you already know the risks associated with it since you do it regularly. So for example of this is changing, let's say changing the Wi-Fi password of your access point. So that can, it depends, it still depends on your organization. You are the ones defining it. But since you know that it's just a small risk, ba, yung pagpapalit naman is just for the end users, you just propagate the new password to everyone. So that one can be pre-authorized. So once you file a change request, it just automatically gets approved. The next is the normal changes. Here, the authorization is based on the change type because you classify it based on the risk factor. It can be a low risk wherein someone can make rapid decisions, or it can be a major change wherein a lot of stakeholders needs to be informed before the change happens. So this is where you process them. The last one, emergency changes, are expedited assessment and authority. This one may have a separate change of authority kasi you need to act on it quickly. So under change control, it's more of a balancing act on the beneficial effects of the changes versus protection from adverse effect of the changes. And a few more definition here. We have change. We define it as addition, modification, or removal of anything that could have a direct or indirect effects on IT services. The change authority is a person or group responsible for authorizing a change. So normally, meron talagang a team dapat na sila lang talaga lahat nagpo-process ng request. So they can easily audit all the requests kung dumaan ba sa proper approval, etc. Lastly, we have the change schedule used to help plan changes, assist in communication, avoid conflicts, and assign resources. So ito yung mga activities related to each of the service value chain under change control. So this one, maybe you can read more in detail when you have time, but it's a good opportunity to know where each of these value chain activity comes into play. The next one is incident management. The purpose of this is to minimize the negative impact of incidents by restoring normal service operation as quickly as possible. So here, incident is an unplanned interruption to a service or reduction in the quality of service. It is important na kapag in our incident management that all incidents are logged and managed or meet agreed target resolution times. So kailangan may SLA ng target resolution. And another important thing here is you need to prioritize it. Kasi not all incidents is kaya mo naman isolve simultaneously. So syempre, if you have a system down, you prioritize that rather than supporting, for example, someone who is just unable to connect to the Wi-Fi. Diba? So that's where prioritization comes into play. And you also need to determine your resolution times based on the severity of the issue. So here, prioritized incidents are based on classification. So it ensures that incidents with highest business impact are resolved first. Normally, sa incident management, we use readily tools available. Marami ng tools in the market that follows the ITIL framework. For example, in my previous company, we use Remedy. It's a good tool that has workflow built in and follows the ITIL practices on how you manage incidents. Also, I believe meron ding product si IBM niyan is yung I think it's called the IBM Rational Tivoli Incident Manager. So maraming tools. Meron din tayong mga Jira and a lot of different tools for incident management. Another thing to note here is that incidents may be escalated to a support team. So once it comes into your service desk, it can be escalated to a higher support team. And some organizations use a technique called swarming. Swarming is when, for example, you have an issue, you pull out one person from each team kasi hindi mo pa alam yung root cause. So by that, you have all hands on deck para masolve agad yung incident. So again, here are the value chain activities related to incident management. Next, we have problem management. So problem management is a practice to reduce the likelihood and impact of incidents by identifying actual and potential causes of incidents and managing workarounds and known errors. So once you have identified na marami kang incidents, you create a problem. So for example, may tumawag sa help desk na sira yung Wi-Fi. We cannot connect to the internet. So you log it as an incident. Then you receive another call na similar. So now you know that something is wrong. It's not just a one-off. So you create a problem for this kind of issues. And you alert the appropriate support team for the collection of incidents. Once you identified it, na ganun nga, consistent marami, you now have a known error. So a known error is a problem that has been analyzed but has not yet been resolved. So next time, pag may tumawag ulit na caller, for example, your 11th caller after receiving 10 incidents, you will just tell them that we have a known issue right now, it is being analyzed, and please wait for further notice. So hindi na ma-overwhelm yung iyong incident management. So normally, di ba, if you, for example, don't have internet in your home and you call the telco, may recording na agad na nagsasabi na we are experiencing technical issues, we are restoring it as soon as possible. So that is an example of problem management. Sometimes there can be an interim solution to reduce the impact of an incident. That is what we call a workaround. So if, for example, sira nga yung Wi-Fi, a workaround to it is you can advise the users to connect using LAN cable in the meantime while we are still resolving the issue with the Wi-Fi. So workarounds needs to be documented in the problem records and can be done in any stage. So here we have problem identification and then problem control, and then once you have a control it, you can now control the error or determine the root cause and resolve it permanently. So here are the value chain activities for problem management. Next, we have a service desk. The purpose of the service desk practice is to capture demand for incident resolution and service request. So incidents and service requests, dapat papasok siya sa ating service desk. It should be a single point of contact. Kasi nga, you don't want your customers, for example, you have many teams within your organization. You don't want to give them contact this number for email support, contact this number for Wi-Fi support. Diba? Hindi siya maganda. So, dapat centralized yung iyong point of contact para maganda yung experience ng mga end users mo. So, service desk, with increased automation, sometimes yung mga service desk natin, they don't really need to be technically enough kasi their primary job is to just assign the incidents tickets to the appropriate team. We have 4 types of service desk. The first one is local service desk if yung service desk ninyo is located within the same building of you are. So probably you just have a small company located in the Philippines. You can afford to just have your service desk in-house in the same building. Centralized service desk naman uses a single location to serve all users. This is applicable if you have many branches and you put a central location where the service desk is. So doon na lahat tatawag yung mga ibang branches mo. Virtual service desk naman allows your agents to work from multiple geographically dispersed locations. So this is a perfect example of yung mga work from home arrangement wherein sometimes yung mga BPOs is they already allow you to work from your home. The next one is follow the sun. This is where the service desk is geographically dispersed into two to three locations to be able to provide 24/7 support. So for example, you have a service desk in the Philippines. Once it's working hours in the Philippines, 8 to 5, 8 to 6. Once the shift ends, the people in, let's say, India takes over kasi doon naman sa kanila working hours. And then once the support center in India closes, it will be absorbed by the EMEA team and then the US team and so forth. So that's the concept of the follow the sun model. Lastly, we have here the value chain activity related to service desks. So next, we have service level management. The purpose of this practice is to set clear business-based targets for service performance so that the delivery of service can be properly assessed, monitored, and managed against these targets. So dito ka na gagawa ng agreement, which is a documented one, but it should be in simple terms and easy to understand. So here are the key requirements for successful SLAs. It must be related to a defined service, should relate to defined outcomes, not just operational metrics. So hindi pwedeng mag-imbento ka lang ng gusto ko ng 99% uptime of my server. So syempre, you need to be realistic na parang, is this really possible? It should also reflect an agreement between the service provider and the service consumer. So kailangan nag-agree both. So normally in the telco industry, this one is kasama yan doon sa inyong pinipirmahan na terms and condition. Although hindi na natin siya binabasa in detail, pero if you read the fine print, meron talaga dong mga nakastate na the service level agreement is only 80%. You will only get we can only guarantee 80% of the speed na nakasulat doon. And the last one is must be simply written and is easy to understand for all parties. So service level management, you just need to take note to understand that this is where you set your targets. So again, here are the activities. Next, we go into service request management. So here, the service request is to support the agreed quality of service by handling all agreed user-initiated service requests in an effective and user-friendly manner. So, ang difference nito sa incident is that service request is wala kang issue, it's simply just a request. For example, creation of an email account, resetting your password. So wala namang issue, it doesn't impact the business, but it's more of a request. Most of the time, service request kasi is ino-automate na siya. So, hindi na siya normally ginagawa manually. And there are a lot of tools that are available to manage service request. For example, password reset, you just go into a portal and then get, for example, an OTP and then marireset na yung password mo. Another thing is that creation, for example, of distribution lists sa Outlook. There may be a form that when you fill it out and once someone just clicks approve, it is something na nakikreate na agad sa Outlook. So that one is a sample of the service request management. It doesn't stop with the manual intervention of actual service desk personnel, but you can also employ tools and technology in order to automate it. So I think yan, nasabi ko na rin yan based on here. It should be standardized and automated to the greatest degree possible. And here it is, this one is very important. Policies should be established regarding what service requests will be fulfilled with limited and even no additional approvals. So syempre, like yung, for example, creation of email, you don't want all of your staff to have email accounts. Or like, if you have different employees with sensitive roles, you don't want them to send emails outside your organization. Diba? These are kinds of policies that you should establish. So once you determine it, kaya mo siyang i-automate na for example, this user, he's only allowed to have this set of service requests authorized for him to request without approval, something like that. So kailangan mas streamline mo din siya by employing the policies. And last one, the expectation of users regarding fulfillment time should be clearly set. Dito naman, we need to have our parang fulfillment time. We need to define this when they make a request para hindi sila nag-aantay sa wala. So for example, meron kang email creation na service request, you need to give them the fulfillment time. Normally, they will give you 1 day to create it. Ba? If para alam nung nag-request kung kailan siya magfa-follow up. Na alam din niya na pag wala pang 1 day, hindi possible na hindi pa talaga nakikreate yung request niya. So setting the expectation is really important in service request management. So basically, it's the same with what we discussed earlier, policies, workflow. Here are the activities related to service request. Now we go into IT asset management. So the purpose of this is to plan and manage the full life cycle of all IT assets to help the organization maximize the value, control cost, manage risks, support decision-making about purchase, reuse, and retirement of assets, and also meet regulatory and contractual requirements. So mainly, this is your inventory of all of your IT assets. So dapat lahat ng servers ninyo, lahat ng equipments, even your workstations. Normally in companies, they have asset tags. That is all part of the IT asset management. Pwede rin isama sa IT asset management is your software licenses. You need to track kung ilan yung users ninyo, di ba? Para at one glance, you have the picture of your assets. Should be stored in the database as well. Next, we have monitoring and event management. So this one is like a centralized team, for example, na nagmo-monitor lang of the events happening in your infrastructure. So the purpose of this is to systematically observe a service or service component and record and report selected changes of state identified as events. So event naman, we define it as any change of state that has significance for the management of a configuration item or IT service. So ito, normally ganyan, pag lumabas ito sa exam, since we just need to remember this in the recall level, normally it will come out word per word na what is a change of state. So you just answer event and so on. But in real life, the practice is you need to have like a command center na ang trabaho lang talaga nila is mag-monitor and report to the right teams what to do next. Next, we have release management. The purpose of this is to make new and change services and features available for use. So dito, magkakaroon ka ng release plan. For example, meron kang next version ng iyong software, you create the release plan. So this is where you start strategizing. Kailangan ko ba ng pilot users? Will I deploy it to how many users first? Diba? Kasi you need to test it. Dito yung mga beta testing. Or if you have equipment in your office, you maybe want to isolate it in a test environment first. So release management is more on the planning only. Planning itself. Hindi pa dyan kasama is yung transition into the live environment for all users. So this is more on the training and documentation. Yung mga ganong strategy pa lang on how you would release something. Service configuration management, the purpose of this is to ensure that accurate and reliable information about the configuration of services and CIs that support them is available when and where it is needed. So normally this is your company or your organization needs to have this database. It's like a database where kita mo na lahat ng mga services or ng mga configuration ng devices or ng servers mo, for example, or routers or switches. Kasi you don't want to remote to them. For example, gusto mong malaman alin ba dito ang mga naka-install yung, let's say, Windows 2016. So you don't want to remote to them one by one and determine it. So you, as you install the software, you maintain a configuration database para pag tiningnan mo siya, you already know which servers has this version of the software. So a configuration item is any component that needs to be managed in order to deliver an IT service. So examples of a configuration item is software installed on a server, fixed levels, patches, and etc. So now we completed our practice. So which practice ensures that risks are properly assessed, authorizing changes to proceed, and managing a change schedule in order to maximize the number of successful IT changes? So the answer here is change control. Identify the missing words in the following sentence. A known error is blank that has been analyzed but has not yet been resolved. So a known error is a problem that has been analyzed but has not yet been resolved. So last, we have technical practices. Under technical practices, only one of the three yung kasama sa foundation level. So deployment manager is, the purpose of this is to move you or change hardware, software, documentation processes, or any component to live environment. So from yung ating release management in the previous slide, from there, we only do the planning. Once you are ready, you enter into the deployment management. So dito na papasok yung inyong mga tools on how you would deploy it. Maybe you have a software center that allows you to automate the deployment of software or something similar. So with that, we now complete the practices relevant for the foundation level. So if we put it on together, we discuss the four dimensions in IT service management that we need to consider when putting it into our service value system. And then we also go into the service value chain and the practices for the 34 ITIL practices, but we only discuss the ones relevant for the foundation level. So this one is just the three diagrams that you really need to know and understand. When you see this, you should be able to explain how all of these work in order for you to succeed in your ITIL certification path. So we're almost done. So maybe I'll just take this time to explore more a bit onto where do you go from here. So as I mentioned, ITIL, the ones that was released last year was only the ITIL version for foundation. So once you are ready, you already passed this, you can now take one of the specialist and the strategist ITIL certifications. So once you complete the 4, you become an ITIL managing professional. In order for you to become an ITIL strategic leader, you need to pass the ITIL strategist and the ITIL leader exam. And once you attain both, you can now be considered as an ITIL master. So normally the exam costs about 500 USD, around like that each. So it's really a big investment also for yourself to take a ITIL path. But you need to really prepare from it. Normally, I think starting late last year, hindi na sila, lahat na accredited ITIL training providers are no longer allowed to sell just the training. So lahat ng training comes with the voucher for the exam. So it needs to be bundled. So even if you take online classes, all of it comes with bundled with the certification, with the voucher for the certification exam. So that's why medyo mahal siya. Normally, the package costs around $600, $500 to $600. Doon siya nagre-range. So that's just something that you consider if you're studying. Likewise, if you want to do self-study, the ITIL handbook is also available for you to purchase from the Axelos website. And I think meron din sa Amazon. So this wraps up our session on the introduction to ITIL 4. So I'm not sure if we still have time to do the practice exam. But if you want to have some practice exam, I have here prepared from the Google Forms. So you can scan this QR code, or maybe I'll post the link as well into the chat box. So this is just 20 questions just to gauge your idea. And you will also know your score as soon as you submit the form. And the passing score is of course 65%, but when you are doing any practice exam, you should aim for at least 80% para mas may error ka when you take the actual exam. So I guess that wraps up for me for this afternoon sessions.